The interrogation room smelled like burnt coffee and cold metal, and Maya Bennett sat in a steel chair with her wrists cuffed behind her, watching Lieutenant Dean Mercer reach up and pull the visible camera's power cord from the wall. The little red light died without a sound. A single sheet of paper sat on the table between them, typed and waiting for a signature that wasn't hers yet. Sergeant Calvin Rourke leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, the posture of a man who had done this before and expected to do it again. "Nobody in this building is going to believe a probationary rookie over a decorated sergeant," he said. "Not the chief, not a judge, not your own union rep, if you even qualify for one yet." Maya let her shoulders curve inward, let her breath catch, let her eyes go glassy and afraid, the way a 26-week rookie's eyes might look after a night like this one. Outside the building, in an unmarked van 3 blocks away, an FBI surveillance team sat in near silence, headphones on, listening to every word through a court-authorized recording device, a thin adhesive patch worn beneath a bandage on her forearm, rather than anything a routine pat-down would find. Its warrant signed and sealed a week earlier. The officers who'd cuffed her that afternoon had checked her for weapons, not for medical dressings, and no one had thought to ask why a rookie had a bandage on her arm at all. Rourke believed he was breaking a frightened young officer who had made a terrible mistake and now had no one to turn to but him. He had no idea that the woman across the table had spent the better part of 2 months waiting for exactly this, for him to explain, in his own voice, precisely how his department decided who deserved to be treated as guilty. To understand how she'd ended up cuffed to that chair, the story has to go back 8 weeks. To the morning Maya Bennett first walked through the doors of the Riverton Police Department carrying a duffel bag and a personnel file that wasn't entirely true. The squad room was old in the way buildings get when nobody expects anyone to notice. Water stains on the drop ceiling, a coffee maker held together with tape, lockers dented from decades of frustration taken out on metal instead of people. It was a room built by men who had worked there a long time, and it did not particularly want new company. Maya's cover file described her as a 26-year-old academy graduate, solidly average in her scores, a little nervous under pressure, carrying student loan debt, and a mother back home who was counting on this job working out. It wasn't who she was. She had a law degree, 3 years of FBI training behind her, and a specialty in forensic interviewing that had made her the obvious choice for an assignment that required someone patient enough to be underestimated for months at a time. The credential itself was real, not forged. She'd completed the state academy under her cover identity months earlier, certified through a joint task force arrangement between the Bureau and the state's Peace Officer Standards Board, with a single cooperating city official aware of her true status, and no one inside Riverton PD looped in at all. On paper, she was exactly the rookie she appeared to be. Only the reason she'd applied was different. She had been selected for this operation for a simple, ugly reason. Sergeant Calvin Rourke had a documented habit of dismissing black officers, women, and rookies as people who existed to follow his lead rather than question it. A probationary black woman checked every box he was least likely to take seriously, which made her the only kind of officer who could get close enough to watch him work without him changing his behavior to hide it. Rourke found her within her first week. He called her sweetheart in front of the watch commander, corrected her use of proper radio codes she hadn't actually gotten wrong, and assigned her 3 straight shifts of parking lot patrol while newer white recruits rotated onto real calls. "She's diversity numbers," he told another sergeant, not quite quietly enough. "Doesn't mean she can't learn to be useful." He tested her in smaller ways too, handing her the worst reports to file, watching to see if she'd complain, sending her on lunch runs no senior officer would ask a genuine equal to make. Once, he had her stand outside in the rain for 40 minutes on a call that turned out not to exist, then laughed about it in front of 2 other sergeants the next morning. Maya laughed along, just enough. Maya absorbed all of it without visible reaction, the way she'd trained herself to. What she couldn't absorb without noting it down were the things that actually mattered. Dates of body camera malfunctions that always seemed to happen on Rourke's stops, report language that repeated itself, almost word for word across different arrests, the pattern of complaints that reached Lieutenant Mercer's desk, and simply stopped existing afterward. She logged it all through an encrypted federal device, transmitted to Marcus Shaw at the end of every shift. Never on paper, never in a personal notebook a search of her locker could ever find. The FBI didn't need proof that Rourke was unpleasant. Plenty of people were unpleasant and broke no laws doing it. They needed proof of felonies, planted evidence, false reports, obstruction. And that kind of proof didn't come from watching a man be rude to a rookie. It came from watching him make a mistake he thought no one competent enough to understand was in the room to see. Rourke, for his part, had built a reputation the department was proud of. He had commendations lining his locker, arrest numbers that made him a favorite at budget hearings, and a standing reputation among certain city officials as the sergeant who cleaned up the neighborhoods everyone else complained about. Underneath the commendations sat a second, quieter record, vague traffic stops that never quite matched the reasons given for them, aggressive escalations that started calm and ended in cuffs, and a lieutenant upstairs who had built a career on making sure none of it ever added up to a pattern on paper. Maya learned to see both records at once, and she waited. Jordan Ellis had no idea any of this existed when he pulled out of the hardware store parking lot on a Tuesday night in October, tired from a 9-hour shift, thinking about the chemistry exam he still had to study for and the unpaid internship application due at the end of the week. He was 20 years old, a college sophomore with no criminal record, driving a 14-year-old Honda with a check engine light he kept meaning to deal with and a taillight he'd replaced himself 2 weeks earlier, both bulbs working exactly the way they were supposed to. He'd grown up 2 miles from where he was about to be pulled over, played JV basketball at the high school down the block, and still stopped by his old coach's classroom, sometimes, just to say hello. None of that would matter in about 90 seconds. He was, in the only way that would end up counting that night, simply a young black man driving home late, in a neighborhood a sergeant had decided he needed to watch closely. Rourke pulled him over 4 blocks from the store. He hadn't run the plate. He hadn't clocked a speed. He hadn't observed a single moving violation. He simply watched the car pass, decided something about it didn't sit right with him, and flipped on his lights. He'd done this in front of rookies before, more than once, and every one of them had gone along with it, either out of fear or the simple math of a probationary badge against a decorated one. He had no reason to expect this night would be different. "Tie lights out," Rourke said into his radio as Maya pulled up behind him in the second unit. Maya looked at the back of Jordan's car through her windshield. Both lights were lit, clean and steady, red against the dark. "What violation are we documenting?" she asked quietly, stepping out. "Tie light," Rourke said again, not looking at her. "Both of his lights are working." "He looked nervous pulling out of that lot," Rourke said. "Doesn't take a genius to know he doesn't belong out here this late." There was no version of that sentence that constituted probable cause, and Maya knew it, and Rourke knew she knew it, and neither of them said so out loud. "Step out of the car," Rourke told Jordan. Jordan's hands were already visible on the wheel, the posture of someone who had been taught exactly what to do in this situation, and was doing all of it correctly. "Can I ask what this is about, officer?" "Out of the car." Maya moved to where her body camera could catch as much of the interaction as the angle allowed, and leaned toward Jordan just long enough to say it low and even. "Keep your hands where he can see them. Do what he says. I'm right here." She didn't promise him it would be fine. She didn't have that to give him yet. Rourke frisked him harder than the situation called for, hands moving fast and rough across his jacket and waistband. Finding nothing, saying nothing about finding nothing. "I'm searching the vehicle," Rourke announced. "You don't have a reason to," Jordan said, his voice rising with the first real edge of fear. "You said my taillight. My taillight works. I don't consent to a search. Furtive movement, Rourke said, already turning toward the car. You reached toward the console when I approached. Jordan hadn't reached toward anything. Maya had watched his hands the entire time. They hadn't left the wheel until Rourke ordered him out. She watched Rourke lean into the driver's side, one hand disappearing behind the seat for half a second longer than a search required, and when it came back into view, a small, clear bag had appeared between his fingers, resting where a moment earlier there had been nothing at all. Across the street, mounted above the hardware store's loading dock, a security camera sat pointed almost directly at that side of the car. It wasn't luck. The Bureau's mapping of likely stop locations along Rourke's usual patrol routes, built over weeks from patterns in his own dispatch logs, had already identified the hardware store as a cooperating business willing to preserve footage on request. And Maya had made a point, days earlier, of steering the second unit's parking angle to keep that camera in frame. Rourke straightened up, held the bag toward the light, and said, loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Look what we've got here." "That's not mine," Jordan said, and his voice cracked on the word not. "That is not mine. I don't. You didn't find that in my car. That's not real. I don't know what that is." "Add resisting to the report," Rourke told Maya, already walking Jordan toward the cruiser, "and lying to an officer. He knows exactly what it is." He pressed the bag into Maya's hand like he was passing her a gift. "Bag it, log it, and write it up," he said. "You'll learn the language fast enough." At the precinct an hour later, Rourke stood over Maya's shoulder while she sat at a computer with a blank incident report open on the screen. "Traffic stop taillight violation," he said, the words coming easy, rehearsed. "Subject exhibited furtive movement consistent with concealment. Officer observed probable cause for search. Search recovered a controlled substance from beneath the driver's seat. Subject resisted verbal commands." Maya's hands stayed still on the keyboard. "I didn't observe any of that," she said. "You were standing right there. I was standing right there, and I watched both taillights working, and I watched his hands stay on the wheel until you told him to get out." "The cruiser cams both went down tonight," Rourke said, unbothered. "Yours and mine. You know how it is with the old units. Her body camera, issued separately from the cruiser system, had captured the stop start to finish, though she said nothing about that yet, unwilling to hand him a reason to find a way to lose the footage before the Bureau could secure a copy." "Then there's nothing to contradict what actually happened," Maya said. "Which means there's no reason not to write what actually happened." The squad room around them had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone in them is listening, and none of them wants to be caught doing it. Two officers near the coffee machine found something urgent to do with their hands. A dispatcher 2 desks over kept her eyes on her monitor a beat too long to be natural. "Sign it," Rourke said. "It's your report. Write what I'm telling you happened, and it's your name on it, and we're done." "I'm not signing that," Maya said. Something shifted behind Rourke's eyes, calculation replacing the easy authority he'd worn a moment earlier. A rookie who refused an order like this one wasn't simply inconvenient. She was a witness who could someday contradict him, and witnesses who could contradict him were the one category of problem he had never learned how to manage with intimidation alone. That night, in the privacy of her car 3 blocks from the precinct, Maya sent the signal she and Marcus Shaw had arranged weeks earlier. A short, coded text that meant the operation had crossed from surveillance into active threat. Within the hour, federal agents had quietly requested preservation of the hardware store's security footage, arranged for independent lab testing of the substance logged into evidence, and confirmed Jordan Ellis's booking status, so he could not simply disappear into the system while the larger case developed. Under the operation's own written protocol, that confirmation triggered a second step. A federal victim's advocate reached Jordan's mother before sunrise, and an independent defense attorney, unconnected to Riverton PD or the Bureau's own case, was in contact with the county prosecutor's office by mid-morning, quietly urging an emergency review rather than a bond hearing, on grounds the office wasn't yet told the full truth of. It wasn't enough. Maya knew that even as she typed the message. Jordan spent that night and the better part of the next day in a cell, charged with possession and resisting, before the emergency motion secured his release, and nothing the FBI did in those hours was going to undo the fact that he'd been there at all. Rourke, meanwhile, had reached his own conclusion. A rookie who wouldn't sign was a rookie who might talk, and a rookie who might talk had to be dealt with before she found anyone willing to listen. He and Mercer spent the better part of a day arranging it quietly. A locker access log altered to show nothing unusual. A loyal officer positioned to back up whatever story they needed. An anonymous tip line call that would give the whole thing the shape of something that came from outside rather than from them. 2 days later, Maya noticed the vent panel on her locker sitting a few degrees off true, screws that had clearly been removed and replaced by someone in a hurry. She opened it and found a handgun tucked behind her spare uniform, unloaded. Pulled from the evidence room's own intake and logged there under a serial number that would trace directly back to Riverton PD's own custody chain once anyone bothered to check. A hallway sensor the Bureau had quietly placed near her locker weeks earlier. In a stretch of corridor the department's own camera didn't reach, had already recorded the panel being opened 40 minutes before her shift began. She had barely stepped back from the locker when Rourke came around the corner with Mercer and 2 other officers behind him, moving with the unhurried confidence of men executing a plan rather than reacting to a discovery. "That's Bennett's locker," Rourke said, loud enough to carry. "Somebody want to explain why there's a stolen weapon from evidence sitting in it?" "I've never seen that before in my life," Maya said, and let her voice shake exactly the amount a frightened rookie's voice might shake. They handcuffed her in the middle of the squad room, in front of everyone. Rourke made sure of it. Made sure the arrest happened where junior officers eating lunch at their desks would see it, where the dispatcher who'd looked away 2 nights earlier would see it again, where anyone who might have quietly doubted him would now have a clean, simple story to believe instead. The rookie panicked. The rookie stole a gun. The rookie was never who she claimed to be. One young officer near the break room, a woman named Elena Price who had been on the job 11 months and had noticed things about Rourke's stops she hadn't yet found the courage to say out loud, watched Maya get walked past her in cuffs and said nothing. Elena had clocked the same taillight problem 2 nights earlier, watched Rourke wave off a search that made no sense, and told herself it wasn't her place to question a sergeant with 20 years on the job. Watching Maya now, wrists bound, being marched past desks where nobody would meet her eyes, Elena felt something twist low in her stomach that she recognized, uncomfortably, as her own complicity. She would think about that silence for a long time afterward, which was how Maya came to be sitting in the interrogation room, wrists cuffed to a steel chair, watching Mercer kill the camera, and Rourke lean against the wall like a man who had already won. The prepared confession on the table said Maya had panicked during the traffic stop, felt overwhelmed by the pressure of police work, stolen the weapon out of fear, and fabricated an accusation against Rourke to protect herself. It said she would resign quietly, without further incident, and in exchange, no felony charges would be filed. "Sign it, and you walk out of here with your life still in one piece," Mercer said, his voice as calm and bureaucratic as if he were discussing a parking permit. "Don't sign it, and I promise you, the paperwork will say whatever it needs to say for a jury to believe you stole a gun and framed a decorated sergeant to cover for it. You'll go to prison," Rourke added. "Nobody's going to be lining up outside to visit you." Maya let her breathing go shallow, let a tear slip down and stay there instead of wiping it away, let her voice come out small. "Why him?" she said. "Why did you pick Jordan Ellis? He didn't do anything." "They never do anything," Rourke said, and something in his posture eased, the particular relaxation of a man who believes he's already won and has stopped being careful. "That's the point. You pull enough stops. You find one that turns into an arrest. The numbers go up, the funding follows the numbers, and everybody upstairs stops asking questions about how the numbers got there." It matched, almost exactly, The arrest spike pattern. The Bureau's own analysts had already flagged against Riverton's overtime budget cycles, a correlation Maya had seen on a spreadsheet 3 weeks earlier, and was now hearing confirmed out loud, in his own words, by the man who'd built it. "The cameras," Maya said. "They only ever fail on your stops." Rourke reached into his jacket pocket and set a small, cracked camera component on the table between them, casual, almost proud. "Cruiser cams are fragile things," he said. "Sometimes they need help failing at the right moment." It was the same model number logged in 3 separate maintenance reports Maya had already pulled from the motor pool's own records. Each one filed under Rourke's unit number. "And the reports," Maya said, turning toward Mercer now. "Why do you protect them? Why do the complaints just disappear?" "Because a report is the case," Mercer said. And for the first time, something like genuine conviction entered his voice, the tone of a man explaining a system he believed in. "Most prosecutors start with what the report tells them happened, and a decorated sergeant's report doesn't usually get treated like a story that still needs proving. Complaints get recategorized as personnel issues instead of misconduct, and personnel issues stay inside this building. Internal review is something I manage, not something that happens to me." "You made me hold the evidence," Maya said quietly. "You made it my hands in the bag." "That's the whole point of a rookie," Rourke said, almost gently, the closest thing to fondness he'd shown her in 8 weeks. "Somebody has to carry it before it becomes real." "The store camera caught you," Maya said. "Across the street. It caught your hand behind the seat." For the first time, something flickered across Rourke's face, not quite doubt, but the beginning of it. "There's no store camera pointed at that stretch of road." "There is," Maya said. "The Bureau flagged it weeks before you ever pulled him over. I just made sure your unit parked where it could see." Rourke's jaw tightened. He didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. The cracked camera component still sat on the table, and his own words about it were already exactly where they needed to be. Somewhere beneath the bandage on her forearm, a small vibration reached her skin, the prearranged signal from the van 3 blocks away, confirming the arrest team was in position and ready. Maya stopped performing fear. It happened quietly. Her spine straightened. Her breathing evened out. The tremor left her voice, replaced by something flat and exact, the voice of a woman who had been waiting a very long time to use it. "You were right about one thing," she said, looking at Mercer. "A report decides which story survives. That's exactly why every word either of you has said in this room tonight is already recorded somewhere neither of you controls." Rourke's confidence didn't collapse all at once. It drained, slowly, the way it does from a man still trying to work out what just changed. "What did you say?" The door opened before he finished the sentence. Federal agents moved into the hallway fast and quiet, weapons holstered, voices carrying clear instructions rather than threats. "Hands visible. Step away from your service weapons. This hallway is secured." Rourke's hand twitched toward his holster for half a second before a firm voice ordered him still, and he stopped, some old instinct for self-preservation finally overriding the reflex. Maya stayed seated until the room was fully secured, cuffs still on her own wrists, waiting for the moment that actually mattered. Then she looked up at both of them. "Maya Bennett," she said. "Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to a civil rights corruption investigation into this department. Sergeant Rourke, Lieutenant Mercer, you're both under arrest." Marcus Shaw stepped into the doorway a moment later, and it was his hands, not Rourke's or Mercer's, that removed the cuffs from Maya's wrists. Rourke and Mercer were taken out through the same hallway where Maya had been walked in cuffs 2 days earlier, past the same desks, in front of some of the same officers. 2 other officers directly implicated by Rourke's own recorded admissions were detained as well. The rest of the department stood in the kind of silence that comes from watching a story rewrite itself in real time. Federal teams spent the following days securing what mattered: servers, body camera archives, evidence room logs, report edit histories, complaint files going back years, along with an informal cache of substances that had clearly never come from any legitimate evidence intake. Jordan Ellis was released the following afternoon, his charges dismissed by emergency motion once the store footage and Rourke's own recorded words made the fabrication impossible to defend. The evidence formally disqualified soon after. He walked out of the courthouse into a parking lot that felt entirely unfamiliar, his mother waiting by her car with her arms already open, and he let himself be held for a long time before either of them said anything at all. Maya met him 3 days later, out of uniform, in a quiet conference room, with a federal victim's advocate present. Jordan looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "You saw him put it there," he said. "You were standing right next to my car, and you watched him do it, and you didn't stop it." "I did see it," Maya said, "and I'm sorry. I know saying that doesn't give you back the night you spent in a cell, or undo the record that got created in your name, or make up for the fear we let you carry while we protected an investigation that needed more time. I supported the decision to wait, and I carried it out, but it wasn't only mine to make. My supervisors authorized it too. And I'm not going to let you think I was some lone actor who could have simply chosen differently on my own that night. I was building a case against a pattern that had already hurt people before you, and stopping it right then, without enough evidence in hand, meant risking that he'd walk away and do it again to someone else the following week. None of that makes what happened to you right. It means we made a choice, and you paid part of the cost of it. That's not an apology," Jordan said. "It is one," Maya said. "It's just not a complete one, because a complete one would need to include getting that night back for you, and I can't do that. What I can do is make sure your record is cleared. And it will be. Someone qualified will tell your school and your employer, officially, that none of this happened the way it was written down. That's already in motion. And you'll have an advocate in your corner going forward who isn't me, because you shouldn't have to trust the person who let this happen to you in order to get what you're owed." Jordan didn't forgive her that day. He didn't owe her that, and she didn't ask for it. The wider investigation, once it opened fully, went further than even Maya had expected. Investigators found repeated body camera failures clustered almost entirely around Rourke's stops, report language copied nearly word for word across a dozen different arrests, evidence weights that didn't match booking records on 3 separate cases, and a folder of complaints Mercer had quietly recategorized as personnel issues rather than misconduct, none of which had ever reached an outside reviewer. They found a pattern of arrest spikes that lined up almost exactly with overtime budget cycles, and a disproportionate number of stops involving Black and Latino drivers relative to any other measurable group in the district. 2 earlier cases surfaced quickly. A delivery driver named Terrence Cole had lost his job 2 years earlier after a nearly identical false drug arrest. His employer notified before the charges were ever tested. His life upended for 11 months before the case quietly fell apart, in a way no one had bothered to explain to him. He'd spent those 11 months driving for a rideshare app under a different name on the app profile, too embarrassed to tell new employers why his last job had ended. His conviction was vacated on a joint motion once Riverton's own prosecutor's office reviewed the pattern. His former employer received formal written correction, and he was connected to a civil claim and lost wage support through the same victim's advocate office that had reached Jordan's mother. A nursing student named Priya Anand had taken a plea deal rather than risk trial, terrified of losing her program over a possession charge she always insisted wasn't hers. Her plea was vacated through a formal conviction integrity hearing, the prosecutor's office joining the motion rather than opposing it, and the state nursing board reopened her application with independent counsel covering her legal costs going forward. Maya carried both of their names with her long after the case closed. She testified, later, in front of a review panel, and she didn't soften the parts that reflected badly on the operation itself. "Jordan Ellis was harmed while we built the case that eventually protected people after him," she said. "Our victim protection procedures moved too slowly for what happened to him that night. That wasn't a failure I made alone at a traffic stop. It was a threshold the Bureau itself had set too high, and it's since been changed. Marcus Shaw, seated beside her, added that the decision to let the operation continue past that night had been his to authorize as much as hers to carry out, and that the review's findings on victim protection timing applied to his own judgment, not only to the agent who'd been standing closest to the harm. The investigation succeeded, Maya said. That success doesn't erase what he went through to get us there, and I'm not interested in pretending otherwise. Rourke was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, evidence tampering, obstruction, conspiracy, and witness intimidation tied to the campaign against Maya. Mercer faced criminal charges of obstruction, civil rights conspiracy, and falsification of records, alongside separate administrative findings of supervisory misconduct that ended his career regardless of how the criminal case resolved. 2 other directly implicated officers faced lesser charges tied to their specific participation. Officers who had signed false reports under pressure, without direct involvement in planting evidence, faced separate administrative and, in some cases, criminal review distinct from the 2 men who had built the scheme. Elena Price, who had stayed silent the night of Maya's arrest, cooperated fully once the investigation opened. An administrative review found she had never personally falsified a report, and her early cooperation and honesty about her own silence earned her whistleblower protection and mandatory retraining rather than termination, though the finding made clear that cooperation afterward did not erase the silence that came before it. Riverton rebuilt its procedures over the year that followed, and the changes fell into 4 broad categories. On evidence integrity, any stop where both the body camera and the dash camera failed at the same time now triggered automatic external review. Every piece of evidence required barcode tracking from the moment of recovery, and report edit histories were preserved permanently rather than overwritten. On report independence, no officer could dictate another officer's observations into a report bearing someone else's name, and each officer's account had to stand on its own signature. On complaint independence, probationary officers gained a reporting channel that bypassed their direct supervisors entirely, and supervisors were barred from closing complaints involving their own teams. On pattern detection, the department began auditing for repeated report language and demographic disparities in stops, and prosecutors were now formally notified whenever an officer came under a sustained credibility finding. None of it was described, by anyone involved, as a fix that made concealment impossible. It only made it harder. 18 months later, once the trials had concluded and the internal review had closed, Maya stood in front of a new academy class, 2 documents projected on the wall behind her. Rourke's original report on Jordan Ellis and the reconstructed timeline built from federal evidence. The difference between these 2 documents isn't writing style, she told the room. One of them records what happened. The other one decides who's allowed to be innocent. Your signature is the only thing that tells anyone which kind of report you're willing to write. Jordan Ellis was back in school by then, his internship application finally submitted, his record formally corrected in the university's files. He hadn't called Maya, and she hadn't expected him to. Some debts don't get repaid in phone calls. A few weeks after that, a rookie 2 districts over noticed a stop that didn't add up and picked up the phone to call an independent supervisor before anything worse could happen. The stop paused. The camera stayed on. No search happened without a legal basis, and no one innocent went home in handcuffs. Maya never made Rourke respect her. She helped build a department where the next rookie wouldn't have to earn a powerful man's respect before anyone listened to the truth. Did Maya and the FBI wait too long to protect Jordan Ellis? Even knowing the larger case depended on patience? Tell us where you'd draw that line.